Welcome to the video. We are going into Unit 3, which is Partnerships and Corporations. At this point, you should have finished Lesson 1, which is looking at partnership characteristics. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the formation of partnerships and income ratios. So let's just have a quick review. Here's 3 questions that I'd like for you to pause the video and answer. How is net income divided in a partnership? How is it decided how net income and loss is split? And thirdly, if a partnership agreement does not exist, and there are 5 owners in a partnership, how much net income or loss should each get? After you've had a chance to pause, let's look at the answers. The income will be divided according to the partnership agreement, or if there is no partnership agreement that has been created, it will be divided equally. How is it decided? Well, this goes back to the idea of the partnership agreement, and if there is none, then 1/5 would be 20%. Let's move forward with some questions for thought. How should net income or loss be split in a partnership? Well, we already got to see some ideas in the last set of slides. If a partnership works for the business, should that be counted as an expense? And finally, when is the income or loss of a partnership recorded? Hopefully, we should be able to answer these questions by the end of the slides. Let's start with partnership contributions. What happens when a partner ends up contributing to a business or the partnership? Partner investments should be recorded at fair market value at the date of contribution. The value of the assets must be agreed upon by all partners. Here's an example. Let's just say we have a vehicle that was purchased by one owner for $20,000. A similar year, make, and model, the vehicle is selling on Auto Trader for $7,000, and we'll assume that this is what we consider to be the fair market value. If all partners agree, it would be valued at $7,000. If the AR were contributed, allowance for bad debts would also have to be accounted for. So if we add accounts receivable, we'll also have to add in the allowance for bad debts to make sure that it's being listed at its fair market value. Moving on, let's consider how we end up dividing net income and net loss in a partnership. There are different ways to do it. Division is usually based on the income ratio, which can be expressed as a ratio, percentage, or fraction of in the following ways. 1. There could be a fixed ratio. 2. The ratio could be based on capital balances at the start or end of a year, or an average of them. 3. Salaries to partners, and then the remainder as a fixed ratio. 4. Interest on capital balances, and the remainder as a fixed ratio. 5. Salaries to partners, interest on capital balances, and the remainder in a fixed ratio. Obviously, the 5th one being the most complicated as it has the most computations involved. So we're going to go through some examples. Here is a really messy one. Let's make it a little bit nicer. So this is an example which I created with my students many years ago on the spot, and then I worked through it. That's why you got to see the work on the previous set of slides. Capital ratio example. Suppose income for each partner is determined by a ratio of the capital invested. How should the $100,000 profit be divided based on following investments? Investments being the capital. I'd encourage you to pause and think and try and work through this question on your own before you see the answer. Now that you had a chance to pause, let's take a look at what the answer will be. First, we need to figure out what these amounts are as a percentage of the total owner's equity. What is the total owner equity? 45,000 plus 100,000 plus 90,000 is 235,000. What's this as a ratio or as a percentage? Well, 45,000 divided by 235,000 is 19.15%, and so on and so forth. So Jagmeet has a capital ratio of 38.3%. Now there are some round off errors, and if we were to add these up, I don't think they'd be exactly 100%. If you want to be precise on how you divide the income, it would probably be best just to keep the ratios as is without actually having chopping off in decimals. And that's because we have rounding and chopping errors. So how would we calculate that $100,000 and who gets what? Well, we're going to take 19.15 times 100,000, or we could take the ratio, and we end up having the incomes as follows. These are rounded to the nearest dollar amounts. So $100,000 ends up being distributed 19,149 to Madir. Jagbeer gets 42,553, and Jagmeet 38,298. That's coming from the percentages times the income. What happens if there's a loss? Well, the division of the net income is determined by a statement called the division of net income or loss. The division is done when the closing entries are done. So that answers the question, when is it actually happening? Here's the first example. Ahmad, Gagan, and Christina experienced a net income of $200,000, AGC partnership. The capital balances were $100,000, $150,000, and $250,000 at the end of the year, respectively. Respectively means that these match up with the names above. So Ahmad invested $100,000, Gagan $150,000, and Christina $250,000. Determine how much each partner should get if Ahmad and Gagan get a salary of $30,000 each, and the interest on capital balance is 10%, and the remainder is distributed equally. Again, I would encourage you to pause this at this moment to try and work through this as best you can. Now that you've had a chance to pause and try and complete this problem on your own, let's take a look at what happens. So let's start with the salary allowance. We know that $30,000 is going to go to Ahmad and Gagan. So let's add that. There's going to be $30,000 here and here, and 0 for Christina. So how much did we end up taking away? Well, we got $200,000 minus 60, but that doesn't really have any impact on how much goes here. What does go here? Well, the interest on capital balances is 10%. So we're going to be taking 10% of these capital balances here. Calculating 10% of 100,000 will be 10,000 here. 10% of 150,000 is going to be 15,000 here. And 10% of 250,000 will be 25,000 here. So we update the chart as follows. Now, whatever remains is distributed equally. We can take all of this and add it up. 30 plus 30, oh, something not quite right. 30 plus 30 is 60. 60 plus 10 is 70. 70 plus 15 is 85. And 85 plus 25 is 110. So far, $110,000 has already been distributed. So here's the math for you. That ends up meaning that after our $60,000 salary, we have 140 left. 140 minus the 50,000 here from the interest allowance means that there's $90,000 left. And that $90,000 is to be distributed equally. Well, there's 3 people, so 90 divided by 3 will be 30,000 each. Adding all this up at the bottom, Ahmad will get 30 plus 10 plus 60, which will be 70,000. This will be 45 plus 30 is 75, and this will be 55. Moving on to example 2, suppose a partnership experiences a loss of $10,000 and income is divided by 1. Ahmad gets a salary of $10,000 and Gagan gets $8,000. Interest on capital is 4%. The remainder is divided according to the ratio of capital balances. And our job is to create a division of net income statement and journalize the closing entries for capital. The one thing which is missing here is the capital balances. Let's give you those. Total capital will be 100, 150, and 250, and this is coming from the previous question. That means we have a total capital of 500,000. I'd encourage you to pause at this moment to try and see if you can do this question on your own, and then come back and check. Let's take a look at what the percentage of capital will be. Well, we know that the total is 500,000. Ahmad had 100,000, so 100,000 divided by 500 is 20%. Gagan, 150 divided by 500,000 is 30%. And Christina, 250,000 divided by 500,000 is 50%. Now, these are very nice numbers. Looks like it was probably a question which was created to demonstrate a problem. Let's go into the next part. So how does this actually look? This is what we call a division of net loss. And it's pretty step by step, where you get to see the loss, the salaries originally put in here at the top. Then we got the interest. Then we have the remaining balances end up being dispersed amongst everybody else. So Ahmad got a salary of 10,000, Gagan 8. That's a total of 18,000. Our net loss was 10. What do we have remaining after that? Well, now we end up subtracting, and it ends up turning to a loss of 28,000. The interest allowance, Well, it's 4% of our capital balances. So 4% of 100,000, 4% of 150, and 4% of 250 is respectively 4,000, 6,000, and 10,000. We add these up. 4 plus 6 is 10, 10 plus 10 is 20, it's 20,000. We end up taking 28,000 as a negative number. We subtract 20, its remaining loss is 48,000. Now we end up having to disperse this according to the capital ratios. And those ratios were calculated on the previous slide as 20%, 30%, and 50%. So we're going to be taking this $48,000 loss and dispersing it according to this ratio. What's 20% of 48,000? Should be 9,600. 30% of 48,000, 14,400, and 48,000, half of that will be 24,000. And the total remaining loss is still here. When it's subtracted, it ends up turning into 0. To find out the division in net loss, we're going to add up each column. 10 plus 4 is 14 minus, 9,600. We're going to get 4,400, and we continue to do that for the columns. And what we also notice here is that this is a way of double checking to make sure that at the end we have a $10,000 loss. We can add these across this way, and we should get a loss of 10. So this is what our closing entries will look like. It's all based upon the previous set of slides. Notice there's positives and there's negatives. The only person who seems to get a positive boost out of this whole thing is Ahmad. And since it's owner's equity, it should be credited. So Ahmad will end up having a credit of 4,400. Income summary, 10,000. And the other two, unfortunately, they end up losing capital. 400 goes down, so it's debited for Gagan, and 14,000 for Christina. By the way, this is really complicated stuff. This is not easy. This is pretty challenging. There's a lot of numbers and a lot of ratios going on, and there's a lot to follow. So if you got lost along the way, don't feel too bad. Just remember, it does take practice. So here's some questions for you guys to try and do. Again, most students struggle with bonuses. It's strongly recommended that you read before the next lesson for a greater understanding and review the Lesson 3 slides. So here's some additional reading, which will also be posted up on the Wiley website. If you have any questions about this, feel free to email me, and you also have the option of throwing questions up into the stream. Thanks for watching. Enjoy for now.